But you said the Messiah will be married with children.
Yes.
Where is
He will have children, physical children.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's in Ezekiel chapter 46, verse 16 and 17. There are hundreds of messianic passages in the Jewish scriptures. There are the passages that are most detailed, most copious, that give us the most graphic end-time prophecies of exactly and precisely what will occur are the last chapters of the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is divided into three sections that are very different. The third section, which you really can begin with chapter 34, moving on, is about the Messiah, the Messianic age, the prince, the shepherd, David, and the prince is mentioned 17 times throughout these texts, going all the way through to the end of the book of Ezekiel. It describes a sacrifice, the building of the third temple that will stand forevermore in Jerusalem. And you'll find that at the very end of Ezekiel chapter 37. The last two passages tell us that and by the way, all Christians agree these are messianic. Just as a point, these are messianic passages. The only difference is that there are some Christians who hold there isn't going to be a real temple in Jerusalem, that this should be seen in some sort of spiritual sense and not. That certainly may be a consensus view in the Roman Catholic Church or in Eastern churches, but that is not the consensus among evangelical Christians. These are very much messianic prophecies. The third temple will be built, and as Ezekiel tells us in the last two verses, that when the sanctuary will be in your midst, then the nations will know that I am Lord. So the building of the temple is connected to the acknowledgement by the world that there is one God and no other. In the context of Isaiah 46, we're introduced to the Messiah who is bringing sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and for a number of reasons. For Passover, he'll be doing that in 46. He'll be bringing a sin offering for himself and on behalf of the people. And you'll find that in Ezekiel 45, verse 20. And of course, this has raised, if you look at the Christian commentators on this, they really are having a lot of trouble. What do you do with that? And the reason, for those of you who are not familiar, why this should be problematic, and I think most of you figure out why it would be, is that according to the Christian Bible, Jesus was the final sacrifice for all time, and there would never be any more sacrifices. Jesus died once and for all. We'll take a look at Romans chapter 6. The book of Hebrews, a book that's anonymously written. For a great deal of time, the church has attributed that book to Paul, although that still remains a controversy within the church of exactly who wrote the book of Hebrews. But it is very Pauline, and in Hebrews chapter 10, it repeats over and over again that there are no longer any sacrifices. In fact, the entire sacrificial system was only pointing to Jesus. That's very much the way Hebrews writes, is that the events that we find in the Jewish Bible were really a foreshadowing of the future. The high priest, Hebrews 7, 8, 9, is all just pointing to Jesus. It's just pointing the way. It's a foreshadow. It intrinsically did not function by itself, but really it was pointing to the future, to Jesus. But after all, if Jesus died for sin once and for all, then why would you need animal sacrifices anymore? And certainly, why would you need a sacrifice for sin? So this creates an enormous conundrum. Some Christian commentators will explain this by saying that, this is it's a fancy term, but it's called a retrospective memorial, which means there'll be sacrifices in the third temple, but it's simply a memorial to the past. This is not correct either, because if you look at the text in Ezekiel, it says specifically that the sin offering will be brought for what it was prescribed for. And what is it prescribed for in Leviticus chapter 4? For sins committed unintentionally. And because this answers, and the other question is, why would there be sin sacrifice? This is a huge question. If in the Messianic age sin will end, rebellion against the God of Israel will come to an end, why will they need a sin sacrifice? I thought there's not going to be sin. Ever wonder about that? Because why would you need a sin offering in the Messianic age if no one will have to teach anyone about God, for they shall all know me, declares the Lord. So why would there be any kind of sin offering in the Messianic age? Good question, right? But once we understand that the korban chatos, the sin sacrifice, is only offered for what kind of sin? For sins that are committed unintentionally, which means, well, people will in the Messianic age still be creatures of habit. We're not going to become some sort of robot or bionic person. We are still going to make mistakes, the Messiah included. And that's why the sin sacrifice will continue, because people will make errors. They will not commit sins of rebellion and defiance. So that's how it's so exquisite, it's so beautiful, because now we know why there would be a sin offering. The sin offering is for unintentional sins, which will continue. The Messiah himself will make mistakes as a human being. He's not a robot. If he was, what would make him righteous? You know, you're only righteous because you're human, and you actually could choose. You know, if I told you my computer is righteous because it doesn't eat on Yom Kippur, that's not okay. You know? You know, and I often, say, I hope none of the Christians will be offended by this, but in Jewish thought, I mean, we'll set aside the virgin birth and everything, but in Jewish thought, if you're born of a virgin and you're God in the flesh, so what exactly, how are you righteous? That's not, if you're born a virgin and you can do nothing wrong, you are sinless, how are you, the person who really has a choice, free will, and resists genuine temptation, not turning stone into bread, but I mean genuine temptation. The person who's on a young woman who is on a conference and has to fly to San Diego away from home, away from her husband, and there she meets somebody else. She has to resist that temptation of adultery. I mean, genuine, real temptation. That's what makes people great. But if you're God and you're born of a virgin, you can't do anything wrong. There's nothing virtuous about that. So, but Ezekiel 46 is describing specifically the division of land and the inheritance that the Messiah's family, his children, the prince's children will have. So that's the location for it.